So welcome everybody to Breakout Session A, More Than Just Lip Service, making real changes towards elevating women of color survivor leadership. I want to thank everybody for coming into this space today, and I would like to introduce our two speakers. So we have Christina Simonchuk. She, her, hers works as a programs manager and DV offender treatment intervention as a defender treatment intervention specialist at Roberta's Place in Grants, New Mexico. In addition to providing direct services to families and assisting with the day-to-day operations for the program, she is a primary service provider to the Domestic Violence Offender Treatment Intervention Program. Christina has worked with offenders for over a decade, starting her career with the New Mexico Corrections Department as a caseworker. Working with incarcerated individuals ignited a passion for helping others and herself heal from the past trauma. Our second speaker today is Nana Minima. Nana Minima, she, hers, hers, a West Virginia native, has prioritized inclusive policies and practices within organizations that she leads and when responding to the unique needs of all survivors. In 2021, Nana founded Mission Advise, which focuses on equipping women newly in leadership positions in nonprofits to lead with holistic wellness in mind for self and your team. Currently, Nana is the executive director of Southeast Advocates for Family Empowerment in Hammond, Louisiana. Nana is also a leader in the movement of ending domestic and sexual violence, who provides leadership with a focus area of promoting wellness for staff and advocates. Her motto is lead, love, live. So I am going to bring up the screen.
Well, while you bring up the screen, Molly, I guess I can start. So thank you for that introduction. And so we do have some slides, but Christina and I chatted and we're just going to try to let it flow organically. So feel free if you all have any comments or questions, you could put it in the chat and Molly will try to cue us to look at there if we aren't looking at that. But this is an opportunity for a conversation and also maybe some tools on how to really elevate women of color leadership of survivors. Christina, did you want to say anything before we?
No, I guess thank you for Molly invited me to this space. So kind of jumping off what we talked about in the last session, just, thank you for inviting me to this space and all of us who are invited to this space.
All right. And I just want to also say a big thank you for our wonderful panelists and also our weaver. They were phenomenal. And a lot of things that they touched on in the plenary kind of feeds into action steps because they were leading off with that at the end. So hopefully those who are here, you'll have something to work with. So Molly, can you put that into, okay, so today, this is just a little bit of the flow of what we're gonna kind of go by. We might go out of order, but it's okay. And want to touch off with where we are in the movement, a little of our past to where we are right now, a call for change. So really, in order for us to see leadership in women of color survivors, we possibly need to scrap what is going on, the existing establishment, the status quo. Then talking about survivors taking their rightful place and building something new, and an opportunity for question and answers. But again, feel free to, if you have any comments or questions, to put them in the chat. So Molly, you can go to the next slide. I guess I should start off to say when I do any trainings or presentations that I may use some verbiage where she for victim, but we know that victims can be man, woman, non-gender identifying, all on the spectrum. It doesn't matter what age they are. So you can put here, I'm every person. It doesn't, unfortunately, domestic violence doesn't discriminate, and that people of color are disproportionately affected by this. So you can click to the next slide. So again, we're talking about, we need to know where we're at. We also need to look at our past. So for those of us advocates in this movement, there is a wonderful website put together by NRCDV that gives you a timeline of historically where our roots as a movement started. And a lot of women of color survivors and advocates played pivotal roles. So if you can go to the next slide, we played significant roles as trailblazers, movement changers. So we're talking about social change as a movement here. If we want to be that social change, we got started by looking at other movements, and we can see it on the next slide about where the ending domestic violence and sexual violence, where we started from. It goes back all the way to slavery, the abolition of slavery. So here's just a brief history, the abolishment of transatlantic slave trade, where we were talking about performative allyship, but you had people back trying to end the slave trade who were active allies. It's not just performance. To create real change, social change, you need those who are experiencing that oppression, but also allies to help move past that to a new realm, a new world where we are free of that oppression. We also have here showing the women's suffrage movement, and there were critical roles that women of color suffragists played in that as well. Maybe we're not highlighted as much, but played significant roles there. And you can see in 1871, Alabama and Massachusetts, they were the first states to criminalize assault by husbands against their wives, which I live in the South right now in Louisiana, so Alabama is close by, but that's something very, that I didn't know, that, you know, some people might think the South might be slow going, but it shows that the South was making progress, as well as in Massachusetts in the North. Next slide, please.
And Nana, may I add, while we're going to the
Yes.
next slide, the allyship needs to be a real allyship. So I know a lot of times we kind of make contacts with people we think are allies, but maybe are in the movement just for themselves or the glory that they get from helping people. So I think those allies, I found in my journey that the allies that are there just because, right, they saw, either if they didn't go through the abuse, they saw a family member, they saw a friend, they saw somebody who was affected by this abuse, and they become a true ally to help the movement.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's such a great point. One of my mentors, Samaya Coleman, she and her anti-oppression trainings and stuff that she does, she talks about how you have to earn your allyship every day. You don't just get your ally card, you know, hey, you got it and it's forever. You have to demonstrate with action and earn it every day. And that's something that really stuck with me. And I've seen it demonstrated in my time in doing this work, that someone that had proclaimed to be an ally wasn't there when needed. And so since they identified as an ally, I called them out and said, hey, you, like you said you were an ally, but I would have appreciated this, or this is where you can show your allyship for others, people of color in this fashion. So great point. So again, here talking about the women suffrage movement. And this is from a suffragette here. And I just love this quote right here. With us as colored women, this struggle becomes twofold. First, because we are women, and second, because we are colored women. And just hearing from the panelists earlier, I'm sure Christina, you can share too, that it's a different experience in our shoes. Plus the other layers that we identify as people. It's not just even two-dimensional as here. But Christina, if you wanted to share about this and add on.
Absolutely. So I had some thoughts about this when we talk about this. As you can see, I look very white passing, and I understand the privilege that comes with being white passing. I am Laguna and I am Hispanic, but it's amazing to me that Molly and I live in a rural community in New Mexico, and we are surrounded by so much Hispanic, Mexican, Native American, so many different cultures and ethnic backgrounds. And yet we can still see that even in our communities, that being people of color, we are definitely, right, we are looked down on. And even though, like you would think, right, we are in this community that is Native American and Hispanic and people of color, and even those same people are the ones looking down on us for the work we're doing. And, you know, oh, you're just helping those people. It kind of alludes to that, you know, that stereotype of the racism. And so we are champions against fighting against, and I learned that in my time working with inmates, that I went in and I was very stereotypical. I was very judgmental, and they were just those people. And then I started hearing their stories of trauma and suffering, and nobody woke up at 7 years old and said, I want to be a criminal. I want to be a drug addict. I want to be a victim. Nobody said that. And so it switched in my brain that we, you know, especially those of us who are marginalized, need to be the ones out there. Like Molly said earlier, we fight for ourselves. We stand up for ourselves. And I see myself in every single one of our participants that we serve. And so I think I'm fighting for myself is how I feel.
I love what you just said there, Christina, about fighting for yourself. You can see that in the work that we do with others. But even if we're talking about elevating survivors who are women of color, people of color, that seeing that you're doing this for others is helping you, it's a benefit. It's just adding, it's not taking anything away from you, really. So I just love you sharing that. You can go to the next slide.
All right, thank you both for bringing out those points, and it's very true. To fight for who you were in those survivors and victims now. So I think that was very powerful. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, next slide, please. So again, here's the history continued with the civil rights movement. And people think of this, this movement, it might be identified with some prominent individuals such as Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm X, but we know there is a plethora, and like more than a plethora, so many women of color, people of color that not only identified as African American, but across the board that also saw and got sparked from some of the things that African Americans were doing and had their own movements start up across the US. In the 70s, also the feminist rallies. In 1974 is when the first battered women's shelter opened up. And throughout the 70s and 80s, you had a number of women of color that increased and joined in the movement and really helped us to push forward our services and the need for inclusivity. And some of it too, some thought, hey, we need to have specialized services. And maybe it's not just these mainstream programs that get pushed and that have this funding as well. In the 60s, we had the LGBTQ plus rights movement that also helped us inform the work and knowing that it's not just relationships as you think of it as heterosexual that experience domestic violence, to open our eyes up in the service and not just be narrow-minded into cisgendered and hetero-focused services as well. And then one of our things that we love is that was the Violence Against Women's Act that was able to help provide funding, but there's still, as our panelists said, so much more need beyond that. And where sometimes our communities of color, there are facets of funding that have that specialization, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, that they'll have these underserved criteria to get certain funding. And that's where the title of this session is more than just lip service. People will type that up and write it into grants. I know that because I've worked here in Louisiana and also in West Virginia, where they had set asides for underserved or culturally specific programs. And then my home state of West Virginia, we didn't have, well, we had one culturally specific program that had a little bit of stop funding. That was it. So I asked some of the leadership in the state, I said, with the blessing of the coalition was totally behind this when I worked there, but challenging them saying, hey, there's a set aside money. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to partner, as Rhonda was saying, having MOUs to help those grassroots organizations such as Rhonda's organization and Joyce's organization? Are we doing that? Or are we just holding this money off to the side, hoping that, okay, they'll forget about it. There's this money, we can go funnel it back to the same, programs that are having this status quo system. Okay. What are we doing? We're just writing this in, but what is the action?
Nina, that's a good point. One of our smaller funders for our agency was the Navajo Nation, and the strings that came attached for this money to help the Navajo Nation, like that's what it was for. They had so many strings attached that it was not helping anybody. It definitely wasn't helping us as an agency help the population that needed help.
And it's other programs, mainstream programs, other people that have funding and are in certain positions that need to, I said they need to take a stand, actively engage in allyship if they identify. If they don't identify, those who identify as allies, where are you all at? You can help us out, right? To challenge what's going on, because sometimes, as Rhonda was saying, it's good for them to hear us, right? And to acknowledge, but take it a step further past acknowledgement. Like Joyce was saying, I want some action behind that, right? some of these individuals, when us as women of color, survivors, leaders, or aspiring leaders, when we're making our voice heard, I've been in the room where I share something and they just move on. I was one of only 2 women of color directors in West Virginia. And during that time, it's a whole other session. It was a lot of stress. And I was a director of a mainstream program. It was myself and one other individual that identified as a person of color at my organization. So trying to advocate on behalf of survivors of color, other advocates, not only at my organization, throughout the state, to say, hey, we need funding to help this out. It might not even be my organization. So I'm willing to partner with other aspiring organizations, advocates, to help them to get funding. If the coalition hears about it, let me know, because I want to help them out. But we need more than just women of color doing that. Have mainstream advocates, white identified advocates, to also step up and say, hey, I'm willing to take some of my funding and give it to another organization. As Rhonda was saying, I will help partner with them. I will help be I will be the, what is it? I'm losing the train of thought. The fiscal agent, right, for them to help get that funding. If we have more programs do that to help them out, would be wonderful.
Right.
All right, Molly, you can go to the next slide, please. All right, and I love this quote too from Ida B. Wells. The way to right wrong is to turn the light of truth upon them. And so that's what we were just sharing here, like, and what Molly, Rhonda, and Joyce were sharing early on the panel, to say, like, this is what's really going on here with survivors of color, for survivors of color in leadership and aspiring to be leaders. This is what's really going on. We can't do what we need to, these critical things that survivors are needing, because we don't have the support and we don't have the funding. Okay. And Christina, I don't know if you want to share about your experience with, at your program with that, with trying to get the funding and support for survivors and women of color leaders, and shining that light on it.
I think the good thing that we did, that we do in our program, is everybody is kind of capable of writing those grants. And we all have, I guess, the power to do so. And so one of our newest advocates, she had just started and found this grant that was, I think it was through a Hispanic foundation, but she was able to get us money, like, to help us through COVID for phones and stuff like that. But I think part of that funding, when we talk about the truth, and, it's instead of letting somebody else speak for us, that we kind of, and in our organization, we kind of had that, that kind of flat hierarchy to be able to say, like, hey, I found this grant. Hey, I should go out for this funding. And we had that support. But I think there's so many organizations that don't have that, or because, like you're saying, because we're women of color, because we're people of color, we're not maybe taken seriously, or we're not given that platform to be heard when we're asking for this funding. So Sorry, I kind of trailed off and lost my train of thought.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I love how you're shared about your organization structure, because that's something like here we're talking about a call for change, scrapping the status quo. So that's right on point with that. Because some people might think having that hierarchy that, excuse me, that, sorry.
Okay, I'll take over. So the hierarchy, I know a lot of times, when we do, but this is the way we've always done it. This is the way organizations work, right? You have a leader and you have everybody who follows that leader. And I think with us, one of the things that our director had done that I thought was good was she took away that hierarchy. So while there was a leadership team, myself and Molly were on that leadership team, and another staff member. And so we were able to kind of be the guiding light, I guess, for the staff. But everybody was in charge of a project. Everybody had their ownership of a thing. And instead of being over a person. And so, if I was in charge of doing the maintenance for the shelter, then I get to make decisions and bring it to the leadership team and say, hey, our sewer's backed up. I need to call some people in. I need to call the city in so they can come help us. Or it's just kind of giving all of those advocates and all of those people in our organization that voice and encouraging them to use it, encouraging them to make those decisions, and letting them understand that their decisions are good. As long as they're for the good of the organization and the good of our participants, we are going to support them with the decisions that they're making. And I think in changing the status quo, scrapping the status quo, right, that really goes a long way to give that voice to maybe a brand new advocate who just started and kind of doesn't know their place and feels like, and I think I say it all the time, I am the biggest person that has imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know why I'm sitting in this space with all of you amazing people, but that's part of the healing process, right? All the trauma that tells you you're not good enough. But that's kind of the same thing we do with our staff is you are good enough. You are capable. The reason why we hired you is because you are capable and we trust that you're going to make these decisions. And so it's reminding and encouraging, and as a leadership team and being flat, we're able to do that. We're able to encourage each other, which was an amazing dynamic.
I love that so much, Christina. That encouragement too of that, like you had said, with a new advocate, because in other spaces, in maybe someone's past work experience, jobs, like they haven't had that, or it may have looked differently. So I do that with my team too, try to encourage them. And when they come to me as executive director, I'll throw it back to them and say, hey, well, what do you think about it? And I'm like, hey, that sounds great. You did, you had it spot on. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Or if it's something I've never thought about, I'm like, that's so amazing. Like, can you please share that with everybody else? Like, so they get the credit, they get the kudos, and just that stuff to spur them on, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Molly, can you go to the next slide, please? So, here's another quote. If you can't see throughout this, like, I love to get quotes and inspiration. I share that with my team. And we have also themes for the day, like today's Feel Good Friday. So just something that, aspire to help us to go get the energy to keep on going. But here we have, I love this quote from Jack Welch, change before you have to. And that's something with this movement that if we want to have women of color survivors in leadership, like if we can be ahead of that curve, right? We see some people are still stuck, but if you're in a place where you have the ears of someone that can make change or can help spur the change, let's do that before we have to. Because as I was saying before, we're having these set asides in some from the federal government, from the state, they're forcing us, but can we go and be before that? So we're already ready for it. We're not having to play catch up, and that it's easier for folks if you're already there. I know change takes time. It might be uncomfortable for a period of time, but then once you get used to it and acclimated, then it's all right.
I'd love to add to that. So I have a story I always kind of tell. 16 years in corrections. And like I said, when I started, when we were talking about it, that I was judgmental. Those are those people. Oh, they're criminals. Oh, they're convicts, you know. And it really took that, like, looking at myself, looking at the person I had become, and realizing it's not going to help me, and it's not going to help anybody around me. And so I really, that change before I have to, I started changing my mindset there, and I started listening to the stories of trauma, and just realizing that these are people, and mostly marginalized people, especially in our area, well, across the country, but, you know, a lot in our area. And so that changing before I had to really opened up those doors for me to be sitting in this space with all of you, and that it was not easy, and I had to question myself. But I think, you know, when we talk about this, when we're talking about survivors, that's what we have to do as survivors, is we question everything around us. And how did we get here? Why are we here? What is our purpose? And maybe that's why a lot of times we are more driven in this field, right? To become those allies and to become those fighters, because we had to question ourselves.
I know I've experienced that too, that questioning. So yes, you're right on point with that. Molly, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so trying to look up a little bit of statistics. I like numbers sometimes to help me, and that helps to get a better picture for some folks. So I looked up on the domesticshelters.org that there are about 2,000 plus domestic violence programs nationwide that they list. There could be, you know, more in emerging ones that we don't know about. But I was just curious about how many of those programs identify as women of color and survivors. Like, I couldn't find the stats on that. I'm just curious, you know, if our funders and programs that ask for, you know, hey, how many people from underserved, marginalized communities are you serving? Are they also asking who's leading? What does that leadership look like? Who are not only executive director, but other people in leadership and management, like Christine, you were saying there's like a leadership team. What does that look like? Maybe if we're trying to make some significant change in providing services to women of color and people of color, that we need people of color in leadership, right? And when are we going to make space for that? And by making space, sometimes that means that other people need to get out of the way. As Joyce was saying, people that have been there for years, thank you for your service. Now let's transition and make space for others, because that's all that's going to happen. We can create new domestic violence programs, new sexual assault programs, human trafficking, whatever, but then that's just going to increase the number of programs. It's not going to increase necessarily the percentage of women of color led programs if still we're continuing to fund programs that are led by mainstream white identified individuals, which is okay. No shame to that. But we're talking about elevating women of color survivors, and that is needed.
Right. And I always think of it as the more diverse our programs, the more we can help our diverse population. Because our program has, we have several different ethnicities in our program, and several on the leadership team. And it's amazing. I am Laguna, just like Molly, but I was not raised traditionally. And so I learned so much from just Molly being on the leadership team with her. And then that helps me help our participants who are, Laguna or Native American, because I understand the traditions and the culture. But it is, and it seems like we're doing a disservice. But we're the only ones seeing it, I guess. When we talk about those mainstream programs, we kind of get stuck in that because we've always done it this way. But sitting here today and yesterday, we know, that to identify, for our participants to feel safe with us, they need to see themselves in us. And so when we have a diverse staff, that only helps to make our program grow and make it the best it can be, because we have so many different cultures and so many different people and so many different perspectives, helping all of the different perspectives and walks of life that come through our doors.
Yeah, most definitely. So I know we're getting shorter on time, so we might go through this a little bit more quickly, but please, if you have questions, please raise your hand, put it in the chat. Open that for the opportunity for you all, excuse me. So we can go to the next slide. Just saying change is scary. It's time for us to make a difference. And some of those people that have been like in leadership forever, like when I first became an executive director in West Virginia, I came in right after a leader had been there for almost 40 years, a white identified woman. And I came in as a, first generation African-American. My father's from Nigeria. People look at my name and just assume like, they know, they think like, oh, she's not white. So she's not white. And people assume because I present to look younger, that, I'm not qualified. Why am I here? What is she doing? Even though they don't know the history of the amount of time I've done work in this movement, that I've been worked at a local level, worked grassroots before this movement, and worked at the state level at a domestic violence coalition, and have presented, at various places nationally. They don't know that. They just see what's right here. And for me, they look at my name on paper and think, okay, that's what qualifies you right there. But there's so much more beyond that. All right, we can go to the next slide. Be open for change. All right, time to build something new. Next slide. So I think this might go some tools here. Okay, so what are some tools that we can use to change? And Christina and I were talking about before preparing for this presentation, and she wanted to share about trauma-informed, being trauma-informed. We all hear about that, but I feel like that's still a critical piece that we need to use in this process of elevating survivors and women of color. So Christina, if you wanted to share some about the importance of being trauma-informed.
Absolutely. And I think it was spoken about in our panelist session this morning, that when we are, one, not putting ourselves in that person's spot or forcing services on them, or, like we talked about, Come in, mom's probably hungry, let's get mom fed so that she can actually concentrate on telling her story and saying what's going on, while if she's hungry, she can't concentrate. It's at that basic level of getting our own biases, our own history, our own everything aside, and talking to that participant and really listening to what they say they need. It may just be, I need a place to stay tonight, or I need a meal, or I need $10 to go get cigarettes so that I don't lose it on my kids, right? All of that is us standing back and really listening to what the needs of our participants are. And not only listening, but hearing them and moving forward and not pushing them to do things that they're not comfortable with. And I kind of see that as it kind of needs to be across our staff, our agency completely, because again, when we are allowing those people when we are allowing ourselves and we're allowing others to do what they need to do to be successful, no matter what that looks like, no matter if it looks weird to us, that means we are fully supporting them and we are holding space. And that's what we need to do most importantly for our participants, as well as our coworkers and our sisters in this fight, our brothers and sisters in this fight. And especially our women of color, is just to listen and hear what those needs are and act on those needs.
Yes. I'm like snapping and clapping over here what you just said, Christina, especially when you said about no matter what it looks like, if it looks strange to us, that's what that survivor, that, fellow advocate, teammate, we call each other teammates here at my organization, sister, brother, whatever person doing this work, to allow that space. Okay, we might be looking at them a little sideways, but it's like that's what they need to do. I think of it as if they're not causing hurt or harm to themselves or others, okay, let them do their thing. If it turns out good, I might be like, hey, what'd you do? I might want to try that out, right? And learn something new. So most definitely. So we need to have that being trauma informed, also survivor centered. Sometimes we use that word, but I see it in so many places that it just ends up being something that we write down on, for a grant narrative or whatever.
Yes.
So I feel like every day, like we're allies need to make sure, like in their allyship, where I'm an ally, I need to step forward and do action, but also being survivor centered. What am I doing those actions to be trauma informed and survivor centered?
Correct.
Allowing them to make decisions. I'm not making decisions for them. Right? They have allowing them the space and the place for me to step back and to make room for them.
Exactly. Well. Yeah, and that goes along with, right, our teammates too. That's what we want, is to step back and allow them to grow, allow them to come into their own and be that powerful voice. And support those awesome decisions, even if they seem a little weird to us.
Yes, definitely need that support. And that's what survivors need, as we heard from our wonderful panel, as well as women of color, people of color in leadership. They need our support, our prayers, or whatever good energy towards them daily. If you forget daily, they need that daily. Some might say moment by moment, second by second, they need that, right? So if we can remember that as well. So we're winding down here on our time. Molly, I don't know if anybody's gave you a cue how much time we have left, but I still want to make space if anybody has any questions. I think Rhonda, you have your hand up. Do you want to
I just
share a comment?
I just wanted to, and we've talked about this on other platforms as well, just really eradicating the word victim and how we talk about survivors, overcomers, clients, behind the scenes and in front of their faces. When you have someone that is, Caucasian or of another nationality speaking with a woman that is of Black or brown, and you refer to her as a victim, there's this superiority complex that is happening in the room with her, in her ear. So just being very careful with how we address our clients, the people that we serve behind the scenes, because practicing that is good, so that when we're in their presence, even if they overhear it speaking about someone else, you can still take that as, oh, they're speaking about me as well. Those kind of things, I think is very important as well.
Thank you, Rhonda. That reminded me of a study I just read, and I can't remember the theory, and I apologize, but two groups broken up, and the
Okay. All right. While she comes back, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Rhonda. I love what you said. At my organization, just my common practice, I don't use the word victim. If they identify as survivor, or let them decide how they identify, right? And I'm a survivor, but I like to say I'm a thriver, and I'm living my best life. I'm a survivor of sexual assault and experience a very possessive, controlling ex-fiance. So I don't have that label of victim. I'm beyond that, and I'm not letting that hold capture to me. So I love everything that you said. Thank you so much. All right, so our time is winding down, and I just wanted to share this slide with you for those who like tools and are a little bit like nerdy into like certain theories. So when trying to create change in our organizations can seem overwhelming. So here are some different models for those who like to use models for behavior change. So you have the stages of change, which is called the trans-theoretical model. And this mainly focused, on individual behavior change. And for people trying to create healthy habits, I have a background and did some work in public health, and that's one of the models that we use. So that might be something that if you're trying to engage individuals, you can use. There's also Llewellyn's change model, which is 3 stages. So it's unfreezing, and then you got movement and refreezing. So refreezing the activities and the actions that you want them to do. So the unfreezing is, people that are stuck in their ways, and your culture, your organization, or whatever it is, we don't want them to be in that mode. So you can look into that. And last, before others join us, the last model that I just want to share with you is the 8-step change management model. For those who are interested, and you could share this to your people in leadership, use it yourself. And it's used to introduce changes in management of a company, because we know sometimes you have those who are like Joyce said, the boots on the ground doing the work. But if you don't have that people at the top, your leadership, executive leadership, and your board, if they're not willing to make change, they might be stuck. So hold on. I have a question here. It says, there's a change model for DV. I need to look up the citation, but happy to share. Yes, please do. I would love to see that. Hey, Christina, you're back.
Sorry about that. My internet was unstable for a second.
I was just gonna say that we're just about wrapping up. So thank you both for such a great presentation and information. And I greatly appreciate it.
All right, you're welcome. And If you want more information from me, you can feel free to look up Mission Avize on social media. Look up my name, Nana M, on Facebook and Instagram, and you can find me on there, or I'll place my email in the chat if you want to reach out. So thank you all.
Thank you all.